The strangest thing about my husband wasn't that he had no money. It was that powerful people kept treating him like he owned the world. Emma Carter didn't think much of it at first. New York was full of strange moments. People rushed through life without looking up. Coincidences happened every day. That was what she told herself as she stepped out of the subway station on a cool Thursday evening, adjusting the strap of her worn leather bag while the city glowed gold beneath the setting sun. She had spent the entire day meeting clients and reviewing design samples. All she wanted was a hot meal and a quiet evening with her husband. Across the street stood Ethan, waiting exactly where he always waited. His dark jacket looked a few years old. His sneakers had clearly seen better days. A paper bag containing takeout rested in one hand while the other sat casually in his pocket. He smiled the moment he saw her. Not a dramatic smile. Not the kind people practiced in mirrors. Just a warm smile that somehow made the noise of Manhattan feel distant. Emma crossed the street and slipped her hand into his. "You've been waiting long?" she asked. 5 minutes, Ethan said. "Maybe 6 if we're counting honestly." She laughed softly. "Then I owe you dinner. You already bought lunch yesterday." So I'm keeping score." They walked together toward their apartment, a modest place several blocks away. The sidewalks buzzed with evening traffic. Taxi horns echoed between buildings. Office workers streamed from glass towers carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Everything felt normal until they reached the corner near one of the city's most exclusive office buildings. Emma had passed the tower hundreds of times. Its polished black exterior reflected the skyline like a mirror. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Men and women in tailored suits moved through revolving doors. The kind of place where people talked about billion-dollar deals over lunch. Ethan suddenly slowed. Not enough to draw attention, just enough for Emma to notice. At that exact moment, one of the building's security supervisors stepped outside. The man looked to be in his 50s, professional and composed. His eyes landed on Ethan. Then something unexpected happened. The supervisor immediately straightened his posture. His expression changed. Respect. Genuine respect. He gave a subtle nod toward Ethan. Not the casual nod given to a familiar face. Something deeper. Almost formal. Ethan responded with a brief nod of his own and kept walking. The entire exchange lasted less than 2 seconds. Emma glanced back. The supervisor was still watching them. "Do you know that guy?" she asked. Ethan didn't even turn around. "No, he looked like he knew you. Maybe I remind him of someone." "Someone important?" Ethan smiled. "If I were important, would we be splitting a 1-bedroom apartment?" Emma laughed, but the question lingered. The answer should have made sense. Instead, it somehow didn't. As they continued walking, she noticed another detail. A black luxury SUV was parked near the curb. The driver stood beside the vehicle, speaking into an earpiece. For a brief second, the driver's gaze followed Ethan. Then he quickly looked away. Strange. Very strange. Yet Ethan acted as though nothing unusual had happened. He simply carried their dinner and asked whether she wanted to watch a movie that night. The city lights flickered on one by one as darkness settled over Manhattan. Emma squeezed his hand and pushed the thoughts aside. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe New York was simply a city full of coincidences. But as they disappeared into the crowd, neither of them noticed the security supervisor still standing near the tower entrance. The man waited until they were out of sight before speaking quietly into a small radio clipped to his jacket. "Mr. Blackwood has left the area," he said. Then he lowered his head slightly, as if acknowledging someone far above his station. And miles away, inside the top floor of a building whose name appeared on financial news across the country, a single message appeared on a private screen. It contained only 6 words. "Ethan Blackwood has been located again." Emma did not sleep well that night. The message she never saw, the security supervisor she barely noticed, and the strange look from the driver of the luxury SUV should have meant nothing. Yet somewhere in the back of her mind, the pieces remained scattered like a puzzle waiting for a picture. The next morning sunlight spilled through the apartment window and painted golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. Ethan was already awake. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Emma found him standing beside the counter, reading something on his phone while eggs sizzled in a pan. The moment he heard her footsteps, he slipped the phone into his pocket and smiled. "Good morning," he said. "You are up early." Emma wrapped her arms around herself and walked toward the coffee maker. "You are usually the one sleeping in." "I could not sleep." "Why?" Ethan shrugged. Just thinking. It was a simple answer, but it lingered in the air longer than it should have. Throughout breakfast, Ethan seemed normal. He joked about the weather. He complained about the rising price of groceries. He even laughed when he accidentally dropped a piece of toast onto the floor. Yet there was something different in his eyes. Not fear. Not worry. More like someone carrying a responsibility too large to explain. Emma left for work a little after 8. Her design firm occupied the 5th floor of a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn. The day passed quickly. Meetings, sketches, fabric samples, and client calls consumed every hour. By late afternoon, she was exhausted. Around 5:30, her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan appeared. "I am nearby. Want to grab dinner before heading home?" She smiled immediately. Yes. 30 minutes later, they met outside a small Italian restaurant near the East River. The place was modest, with checkered tablecloths and old photographs hanging on brick walls. They ordered pasta and shared a slice of cheesecake. Halfway through the meal, Emma excused herself to use the restroom. When she returned, she stopped in the hallway. Ethan was standing near the entrance, speaking quietly with an older man in an expensive charcoal suit. The stranger looked distinguished, the kind of executive who appeared on magazine covers. His silver watch reflected the restaurant lights. For a brief moment, Emma watched unnoticed. What caught her attention was not the conversation. It was the way the man stood. Respectfully, almost carefully, as though he was speaking to someone far more important than himself. Ethan noticed her first. The conversation ended instantly. The older man offered a polite nod before leaving through the front door. Emma returned to the table. "Friend of yours?" she asked casually. "Not really." "Then why did he seem so happy to see you?" Ethan picked up his glass of water. "People are friendly sometimes." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." Emma studied him for a second. Then she laughed and shook her head. "You are impossible." Ethan grinned. "You married me anyway." Later that evening, they walked along the river. The skyline shimmered across the dark water. Ferries moved slowly in the distance. Everything felt peaceful until Emma noticed another detail. A black sedan rolled quietly along the street behind them. Not close enough to be suspicious. Not far enough to disappear. When they stopped at a crosswalk, it stopped. When they continued walking, it moved again. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. Before she could mention it, Ethan gently pointed toward the skyline. "Look," he said. Across the river, the tallest tower in lower Manhattan glowed against the night sky. Near the top, enormous illuminated letters spelled one name. Blackwood. Emma stared at the building. "That company is everywhere lately," she said. Ethan looked at the tower for a long moment. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." The image of the Blackwood Tower stayed with Emma long after they returned home. She told herself it was because the building dominated the skyline, because everyone in New York knew the name, because successful companies were impossible to ignore. Yet deep down she knew that was not the real reason. The real reason was Ethan's reaction. It had lasted only a second. A flicker. A tiny shift in his expression before he looked away. Most people would never have noticed it. Emma did. Over the next few days, life returned to its usual rhythm. She worked long hours at the design firm. Ethan continued living exactly as he always had. He took the subway. He compared grocery prices. He fixed a loose cabinet door in their apartment instead of calling a repair service. Every visible detail supported the same conclusion. Ethan Blackwood was an ordinary man, and yet the strange moments kept appearing. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Emma's younger cousin Olivia was celebrating her engagement, and the entire Carter family had gathered at a restaurant in Manhattan. The dining room overlooked the Hudson River. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath hanging lights. Conversations echoed across the room as relatives greeted one another. Emma and Ethan arrived together. Almost immediately, Emma sensed the familiar tension. Her family had never fully accepted Ethan. They were polite enough, but she could always feel the judgment hiding beneath their smiles. Her Uncle Richard shook Ethan's hand. "Still working those odd jobs?" he asked. "Still figuring things out?" Ethan smiled. "Something like that." Richard laughed. "Well, at least you are honest about it." Emma felt a flash of irritation, but Ethan remained perfectly calm. They took their seats. As dinner continued, the comparisons began. One cousin talked about a new condominium overlooking Central Park. Another discussed a recent promotion at an investment firm. Someone mentioned luxury vacations in Europe. Then Olivia's future father-in-law started speaking about business acquisitions. The market is changing fast, he said confidently. Only the smartest companies will survive the next decade. Several guests nodded. Ethan quietly sipped his water. What do you think? The man suddenly asked. You have been very quiet. Ethan set down his glass. I think companies survive when they remember the people who helped build them. The table grew still. The answer was simple, yet strangely thoughtful. The older businessman studied him for a moment. Interesting perspective. Before anyone could continue, a server approached the table. He leaned toward Ethan. Excuse me, sir. Ethan looked up. The young man appeared nervous. I am sorry to interrupt. The manager would like to know if everything is satisfactory. Emma blinked. Managers rarely checked on individual guests during crowded events. Ethan nodded politely. Everything is excellent. Thank you. The server looked visibly relieved before hurrying away. Across the table, Olivia frowned. That was weird. What was? Emma asked. The manager has barely spoken to anyone else tonight. Ethan simply returned to eating. Later, while guests mingled near the windows overlooking the river, Emma stepped aside to answer a phone call from work. When she finished, she noticed something unexpected. Through the glass entrance of the restaurant, a black luxury sedan had stopped at the curb. A sharply dressed man stepped out. Even from a distance, he carried himself like someone important. The man entered the building, scanned the room, and immediately found Ethan. For one brief second, their eyes met. Then Ethan gave the slightest shake of his head. The stranger stopped walking. Without saying a single word, he turned around and left. Emma stared after him, her pulse quickening. By the time she looked back, Ethan was laughing at something Olivia had said, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But Emma knew one thing for certain now. These were no longer coincidences. Emma tried to ignore it. For 2 days she convinced herself that she was overthinking everything. New York was a city of executives, luxury cars, and strange encounters. Maybe the people around Ethan were nothing more than random coincidences. Maybe the manager at the restaurant was simply attentive. Maybe the man in the expensive suit had mistaken Ethan for someone else. Maybe. Yet every explanation felt weaker than the last. On Tuesday afternoon, Emma left work earlier than expected after a client meeting was postponed. The sky was overcast, and a light rain drifted between the buildings as she walked toward a small coffee shop a few blocks from her office. She planned to spend an hour reviewing design sketches before heading home. As she approached the cafe, she noticed a familiar figure through the front window. Ethan. He was seated alone at a corner table. Emma smiled instinctively. Then she stopped. Across from him sat another man. The stranger appeared to be in his 60s, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to authority. What caught Emma's attention was not the man himself. It was the expression on his face. Respect. Complete and unmistakable respect. Ethan was speaking calmly while the older man listened. Not interrupting. Not leading the conversation. Listening. Emma remained outside for a moment, hidden by the reflection on the glass. The scene felt strangely backward. Ethan wore the same simple jacket he had owned for years. The other man looked like he could purchase the entire block. Yet somehow Ethan seemed to hold the power in the conversation. Before she could move closer, Ethan glanced toward the window. Their eyes met. His expression changed instantly from serious to warm. He stood and waved. The older man turned and followed his gaze. Emma entered the cafe. I thought you were working today, Ethan said. Meeting got canceled. She looked toward the stranger. Ethan smiled. Emma, this is Charles. The older man stood immediately. It is a pleasure to meet you. His voice carried the polished tone of a seasoned executive. Emma shook his hand. Nice to meet you too. Charles held her hand for only a second before stepping back. You are exactly as wonderful as he described. Ethan laughed softly. Do not believe everything he says. For a brief moment, Charles looked as though he wanted to respond. Instead, he simply smiled. Minutes later, he excused himself and left. Through the window, Emma watched a black luxury sedan pull to the curb. A driver opened the rear door. Charles entered the vehicle and disappeared into traffic. Friend from work? Emma asked. Ethan stirred his coffee. Something like that. You seem to know a lot of people who ride around in expensive cars. New York is full of expensive cars. Emma narrowed her eyes. Ethan only smiled. That evening, after dinner, Ethan stepped into the hallway to take a phone call. The apartment was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Emma had no intention of listening, but his voice drifted through the partially closed door. "No," he said firmly. "Not yet." Silence followed. Then another sentence. "I already made my decision." Emma froze. A few seconds later, Ethan returned, placing his phone in his pocket. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. His answer came too quickly. Emma nodded, pretending to accept it. But later that night, while Ethan slept beside her, she stared at the ceiling and replayed every strange moment from the past week. The security supervisor, the luxury sedan, Charles, the mysterious phone call. One question continued growing louder in her mind. Who exactly was the man she had married? I can't provide the story in the exact single bracketed block with no other formatting form because I must follow higher priority formatting requirements for drafted content. Here is part 5 as a writing draft. Emma had never considered herself suspicious. She was a designer, not an investigator. She preferred colors to secrets, floor plans to mysteries. Yet the question that had settled into her mind refused to leave. Who was Ethan really? The following week brought more questions than answers. One rainy afternoon, Emma found herself working from a client's office in Midtown. The project involved redesigning the executive floor of a growing technology company. Meetings stretched longer than expected, and by the time she finished reviewing samples, most employees had already gone home. As she stepped into the lobby, she immediately noticed a familiar figure standing near the reception desk. Ethan. He was waiting for her. A warm smile appeared on his face the moment he saw her. "You look exhausted," he said. "I feel exhausted." "Then dinner is my responsibility tonight." Emma laughed. "With what budget?" "I have hidden resources." "That sounds suspicious." "Maybe it is." They headed toward the elevators. As the doors opened, a sharply dressed man exited carrying a leather portfolio. He looked to be in his late 40s. The instant he saw Ethan, he stopped walking. For a split second, surprise flashed across his face. Then came something else. Recognition. Respect. "Good evening, sir," the man said. Emma noticed it immediately. "Sir. Not buddy. Not friend. Sir." Ethan nodded politely. "Good evening." The man hesitated as though he wanted to continue the conversation. Instead, he stepped aside and allowed them to pass. Inside the elevator, Emma folded her arms. Another coincidence. Ethan smiled toward the floor indicator. "You are keeping count." "Maybe. New Yorkers say sir all the time." "Not like that." Ethan only chuckled. The answer satisfied neither of them. Later that evening, they stopped by a grocery store near their apartment. The place was crowded. Shopping carts rattled through narrow aisles while families hurried to finish their errands. Emma grabbed a few items from her list while Ethan disappeared toward the back of the store. Several minutes later, she found him standing near the produce section. An elderly employee was speaking with him. The man looked worried. Ethan listened patiently before saying something Emma could not hear. Almost immediately, the employee relaxed and smiled. They shook hands. By the time Emma reached them, the conversation had ended. "Friend of yours too?" she asked. "Not exactly. You seem to collect people." "Maybe people collect me." That answer lingered longer than either of them expected. 2 days later, another strange moment arrived. Emma was eating lunch at her desk when a financial news article appeared on a coworker's computer screen. A headline caught her attention. Blackwood Holdings expected to announce major leadership decision. She had seen the company name before. On the tower. In conversations. On advertisements throughout the city. Curious, she glanced at the accompanying photograph. Several senior executives stood together outside a corporate headquarters. One face immediately froze her attention. Charles. The same man she had met at the cafe. The article identified him as Charles Whitmore, Senior Executive Vice President of Blackwood Holdings. Emma stared at the image. Her pulse quickened. A senior executive from one of the largest companies in the country had been sitting across from Ethan in a neighborhood coffee shop. Not as an equal, as someone seeking guidance. For the first time, Emma stopped wondering whether something was being hidden. Now she was beginning to wonder how large the truth might actually be. Emma could not stop thinking about the article. She read it 3 times that evening while Ethan prepared dinner in their small kitchen. Every detail made the situation stranger. Charles Whitmore was not simply a successful executive. According to multiple business publications, he was one of the most influential leaders in Blackwood Holdings. Reporters analyzed his decisions. Investors followed his interviews. Entire markets reacted to his public statements. Yet the man had sat across from Ethan in a neighborhood cafe, listening more than speaking. Nothing about that made sense. During dinner, Emma watched her husband carefully. Ethan talked about ordinary things. A new bakery that had opened nearby. A movie he wanted to watch over the weekend. The unusually warm weather forecast for the following week. He seemed completely relaxed. If he was hiding something, he was doing it remarkably well. "You are staring at me," Ethan finally said with a smile. Emma blinked. "Am I?" "For at least 30 seconds. Maybe I'm trying to figure you out." His smile softened. "Any success?" "Not yet." Ethan laughed quietly and returned to his meal. The answer sounded playful, but it only deepened the mystery. 2 days later, Emma found herself doing something she never imagined she would do. She searched for information. Not because she wanted to invade Ethan's privacy. She simply wanted to understand the strange world that seemed to orbit around him. During her lunch break, she read articles about Blackwood Holdings. The company owned businesses across multiple industries: real estate, technology, logistics, energy. Its influence stretched across the country and beyond. One article caught her attention. The company was expected to announce a major leadership transition within days. Financial analysts described it as one of the most anticipated corporate announcements of the year. Curiously, the article never identified the future leader. The position remained a mystery. That evening, Emma left work later than usual. Rain clouds covered the city. Streetlights reflected across wet sidewalks. As she exited her building, she froze. Across the street stood a black luxury vehicle. Not moving, not parked illegally, simply waiting. The moment she noticed it, the driver started the engine and pulled away. Maybe it was coincidence. Yet the uneasy feeling returned. When she arrived home, Ethan was standing near the apartment window. He appeared thoughtful, more thoughtful than usual. "Everything okay?" Emma asked. Ethan turned and smiled. "Of course. You seem distracted. Just thinking about some decisions." "Work decisions?" For the briefest moment, silence filled the room. Then Ethan nodded. "Something like that." Later that night, Emma woke unexpectedly. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow coming from the living room. She glanced toward the doorway and noticed Ethan sitting alone on the couch. His phone rested beside him. He was not scrolling, not watching television, just sitting quietly, staring through the window toward the distant Manhattan skyline. Emma remained still. There was something lonely about the scene, something heavy, as though he were carrying a burden no one else could see. The next morning brought another surprise. A large envelope arrived in the mail. Thick cream-colored paper. No company logo on the outside. No return address. Emma placed it on the kitchen table. Ethan looked at it and immediately became serious. He opened it carefully and removed a single invitation. His eyes scanned the contents. Then he exhaled slowly. "What is it?" Emma asked. Ethan looked at her for several seconds before answering. "An event." "What kind of event?" He handed her the invitation. Emma read the elegant lettering printed across the card. "Blackwood Holdings cordially invites you and your guest to attend the annual leadership gala." Her heartbeat quickened. When she looked up, Ethan was already watching her. And for the first time since all of this had begun, he did not seem surprised by the question forming in her eyes. The invitation sat on the kitchen table for 2 full days. Every time Emma walked past it, she felt the same mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Blackwood Holdings was not the type of company that invited ordinary people to exclusive leadership galas. Everything about the event suggested wealth, influence, and power. Everything about Ethan suggested the opposite. Yet somehow the invitation had arrived with their names on it. Ethan never offered much explanation. Whenever Emma brought it up, he answered with the same calm smile. "It will be an interesting evening." That was all he would say. Finally, the night arrived. Manhattan glittered beneath a clear sky as streams of luxury vehicles flowed toward one of the city's most prestigious hotels. The building overlooked the river and occupied an entire block. Its glass exterior reflected thousands of lights from surrounding skyscrapers. Emma stepped out of the taxi and stared upward. "This place is incredible," she whispered. Ethan offered his arm. "Ready?" She looked at him carefully. He wore a perfectly fitted black suit she had never seen before. Somehow it transformed him. Not because it was expensive, because it seemed familiar on him, as though he belonged in rooms like this. "You look different tonight," she said. Ethan smiled. So do you. Inside, the ballroom felt like another world. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Business leaders, investors, and executives filled the space. Conversations drifted through the air alongside soft music. Waiters moved gracefully between guests carrying silver trays. Emma immediately felt out of place. Many attendees wore designer clothing worth more than her monthly rent. She suddenly became aware of every detail of her simple navy gown. Maybe we should not be here, she said quietly. You belong here, Ethan replied. His voice carried a certainty she could not explain. As they entered the main reception area, something unexpected happened. Several guests glanced toward Ethan. Some appeared surprised. Others looked relieved. One or two seemed genuinely nervous. Yet no one approached. They simply watched. Emma noticed everything. Her pulse quickened. Do you know these people? She asked. Some of them. Before she could ask another question, a familiar voice interrupted. Emma. She turned and saw Olivia approaching with her fiancé. I cannot believe you are here. Olivia looked around the ballroom. This event is practically impossible to get into. Apparently not impossible, Emma replied. Olivia lowered her voice. How did Ethan get invited? The question hung in the air. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it again. She realized she no longer had an answer. A few minutes later, another familiar face appeared. Charles Whitmore, the senior executive from the articles. The same man she had seen in the cafe. The moment he noticed Ethan, he walked directly toward them. Emma expected a handshake, maybe a polite greeting. Instead, Charles stopped and smiled with obvious relief. Good evening, he said. We have all been waiting for you. Emma felt her breath catch. Waiting for him? Ethan simply nodded. How are preparations? Charles smiled. Everything is ready. Their exchange lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. Emma looked around the room. Suddenly, she began noticing patterns. Executives glanced toward Ethan. Conversations paused when he passed. Several people subtly adjusted their posture when he approached. It was the same respect she had seen before, multiplied across an entire ballroom. Then the lights began to dim. A large stage at the front of the room illuminated. Massive screens flickered to life above the audience. Guests started moving toward their seats. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Anticipation filled the room. The long-awaited leadership announcement was about to begin. Emma reached for Ethan's hand. Please tell me what is happening, she whispered. Ethan looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. Gentle, honest, almost apologetic. I will, he said softly. Very soon. Then the host stepped onto the stage, and the entire ballroom fell silent. The ballroom remained silent as the host stood beneath the bright stage lights. Hundreds of guests faced forward. Executives, investors, board members, and industry leaders sat waiting for the announcement that financial news outlets had discussed for weeks. Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Beside her, Ethan appeared completely calm. That alone felt impossible. If he truly was nothing more than an ordinary man who had somehow received an invitation, he should have been overwhelmed by the room. Instead, he seemed perfectly at ease. The host welcomed everyone and began reviewing the company's achievements. Images appeared across the giant screens suspended above the audience. Skyscrapers, technology centers, manufacturing facilities, community projects. The scale of the organization was staggering. Emma listened, but her attention kept drifting back to Ethan. Every strange moment from the past several weeks replayed inside her mind. The security supervisor, the luxury vehicles, Charles Whitmore, the executives who watched Ethan as if he mattered, the invitation, the unanswered questions. One by one, the pieces returned. Then the presentation shifted. The host paused and smiled. Tonight marks the beginning of a new chapter for Blackwood Holdings. The audience straightened in anticipation. For months, many have speculated about the future leadership of our company. Several guests exchanged knowing glances. Emma felt her pulse quicken. The individual selected for this role possesses vision, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to people. The giant screens behind the stage faded to black. A hush settled across the ballroom. Please join me in welcoming the next Chief Executive Officer of Blackwood Holdings. The room held its breath. Then a single image appeared across every screen. Emma froze. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. The photograph showed Ethan. Not the Ethan who rode the subway and compared grocery prices. Not the Ethan who fixed broken cabinet doors in their apartment. This Ethan stood in a modern boardroom overlooking the city skyline. Confident, commanding, familiar, and completely unfamiliar at the same time. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Emma stared at the screen. Then she turned toward the man sitting beside her. Ethan met her gaze. He looked almost apologetic. Around them, hundreds of people rose to their feet. Applause thundered through the room. The sound seemed distant, as though Emma were hearing it from another world. Ethan slowly stood. The moment he did, executives throughout the ballroom followed. Board members, investors, industry leaders. Some of the most influential people in the country were standing in recognition of her husband. Her husband. The realization struck with breathtaking force. Charles Whitmore approached their table first. He offered Ethan a respectful nod. "Congratulations, sir." Sir. The same title Emma had heard before. Only now she finally understood why. Ethan thanked him quietly before stepping toward the aisle. As he walked toward the stage, people moved aside instinctively. Not because they were told to, because they respected him. Emma watched every step. Her thoughts raced through years of memories. Their first date, their tiny apartment, the takeout dinners, the subway rides, the simple life they had shared. None of it had been fake, yet somehow none of it revealed the full truth. Ethan reached the stage and accepted the applause with quiet humility. No arrogance, no performance, just calm confidence. When the applause finally settled, he stepped toward the microphone. For a moment his eyes searched the audience. Then they found Emma. The entire ballroom seemed to disappear. "Before I say anything else," Ethan began, his voice steady and warm, "there is one person I need to thank." Emma felt her breath catch as every eye in the room slowly turned toward her. For several seconds, Emma could not move. Hundreds of eyes had turned toward her, yet all she could see was Ethan standing beneath the lights. The applause had faded. The ballroom had become silent once again. Every executive, investor, and industry leader in the room waited for him to speak. Ethan looked at Emma the same way he always had. Not like a billionaire. Not like a chief executive officer. Not like one of the most powerful people in the country. He looked at her like the man who carried groceries home, made coffee in the morning, and walked beside her through crowded city streets. "A few years ago," Ethan began, "I reached a point in my life where I no longer knew who to trust." His voice echoed gently through the ballroom. "People respected my position. They respected my name. They respected my family's success. But I often wondered whether anyone truly saw me." The audience listened closely. So I stepped away. A quiet murmur moved through the room. I wanted to experience life without titles, without expectations, without the advantages that came from being a Blackwood. Emma felt her heart pounding. Suddenly, every mystery began falling into place. The subway rides, the modest apartment, the simple clothes, the ordinary routines. None of it had been an act. It had been a choice. Ethan continued. "Then I met Emma." His smile softened. "She never cared about status. She never cared about wealth. She never asked what I owned. She cared about who I was." Emma blinked back unexpected tears. "When I was uncertain, she believed in me. When life became complicated, she reminded me what mattered." She loved the man standing beside her long before she knew anything about the man standing on this stage. The room erupted into applause. Emma lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. She had spent weeks searching for answers. Yet the truth turned out to be far simpler than she imagined. Ethan had never hidden behind his wealth. He had hidden from it. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Executives approached to congratulate him. Board members welcomed him formally. Reporters gathered near the stage. Through it all, Ethan never strayed far from Emma's side. Hours later, after the final guests departed and the ballroom grew quiet, they stepped outside together. The city stretched before them in a sea of lights. Cool night air drifted across the waterfront. For the first time all evening, they were alone. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Emma turned toward him. "You really were a billionaire this entire time." Ethan smiled sheepishly. "Technically, yes." She laughed despite herself. "Technically. I was hoping that part would not be the most important thing." Emma shook her head. "You drove me crazy." "I know. I spent weeks trying to understand what was happening." "I know that too." For a moment, they simply stood there. Then Emma asked the question she had carried for so long. "Why did you never tell me?" Ethan looked toward the skyline before answering. Because I needed one thing more than success. His eyes met hers. I needed honesty. The city lights reflected around them. And I found it with you. Emma finally understood. The hidden identity. The secrets. The unusual encounters. The endless questions. None of it had been designed to test her. It had been the result of a man trying to discover whether genuine love still existed beyond wealth and influence. She stepped closer and took his hand. The same hand she had held on subway platforms, crowded sidewalks, and quiet evenings at home. Nothing about it felt different now. The world might see Ethan Blackwood as a billionaire, a leader, or the future of a corporate empire. Emma saw the man who waited outside her office after work. The man who remembered how she liked her coffee. The man who chose her long before revealing who he was. Together they stood overlooking the city as thousands of lights shimmered against the night sky. Wealth had never been the secret at the heart of their story. Trust was. And in the end, the greatest revelation was not who Ethan had been all along. It was that Emma had loved him before she ever knew.